Right, I'm going to start this session. I've got my colleague Jenny on the call today as well. Jenny, I'm going to start sharing my slides, and if you want to start the recording button, go ahead and do so. So just give me a second. And let me just share my screen. Just my screen. And I'll put the Q&A function at the bottom. So thank you to everyone who's made the time to adjust to attend this webinar. It's a Friday and I'm losing my voice and my mind, it seems. Thank you to everyone who's made the time to join this session today. It typically lasts about an hour with me delivering content to you for the first 45 minutes. And then we'll take Q&A right at the end. So this is a webinar or a lunch and learn session based on the start of 12 p.m. today. Just a little bit of an introduction. So these courses have been developed by the Supply Chain Sustainability School. We've got part funding from CITB. It's based on content from SIPS, that's the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, King's College London, and Institute of Collaborative Working have given us content based on the collaboration modules. And all of these webinars and linked workshops are CPD accredited. So those of you attending this session today, you will get a CPD accredited certificate as well. A couple of house rules before I jump into introducing myself and today's session. So do use the Q&A function for any questions you have or any technical support. So like I said, I will take you through the questions and answers right at the end of the session. But if you have any technical needs, then my colleague Jenny Simpson from the Supply Chain School is here today. Do share your feedback at the end, as we're always looking to better our content and our delivery style to you. And yes, you will get a copy of the slide deck. So if you want to sit back, relax, and have your lunch while listening to me, that's fine. If you choose to take notes, that's great as well. So no hard and fast rules there. Just setting the scene and the agenda for today. So we're going to start with introductions. Yes, I will finally introduce myself. I'll take you through procurement elements, but without teaching grandma to suck eggs, the plan, source, manage process, setting the scene as to what we're trying to digitalize within plan, source, and manage of the strategic procurement, but also the tactical procurement, for example, transactional, probably the world that's always reacting in the plant and material procurement world, a little bit of a definition of what digitalization actually means, and some of the tools in the plan, source, manage process. We'll then move on to the things you absolutely need to consider, and then what are the benefits of digitalization in the process, but don't be fooled by that. I'll also talk about some of the pitfalls. Finally, we will end with Q&A right at the end. One thing to keep in mind, and one thing I remember to note down and tell you when I was planning this session is, one important thing to note is that it's technology that should support your procurement strategy and not the other way around. So first of all, think about what it is that you're trying to implement within your procurement and supply chain management process. And it could mean to make it smoother, to make it leaner. You want to get better stakeholder engagement, for example, and then finding the portal or the technology platform to support that, rather than doing it the other way around, which would basically mean that you'd end up with too many online digital portals, none of which actually really talk to each other. So just an opening thought that I said I must bring to mind. Introductions, if you've not been on any of my webinars or workshops so far, I'm Melita De Silva. I work for Action Sustainability and the Supply Chain Sustainability School. I've got roughly about 18 years experience as a procurement manager, also dealing with sustainable procurement and social value. So very quickly, like I said, I will introduce you to the concepts of, or the elements of plan, source, and manage. Let me just put that up on the screen. This is basically what your strategic procurement process looks like. I won't take you through all of the blurb on the screen. This is not an introduction to procurement session. But when you look at all of that's happening in your procurement process and in your supply chain management post-contract award, typically for us as procurement managers, or if you're head of a contract management team, supply chain management, or procurement, what you are trying to do or what you're looking for is first, automation of all or some of these processes or the moving parts within these processes, basically a workflow that kind of handles your requisitions, your purchase orders, receiving approvals on the orders, supply contracts and subcontracts from your executives, your management team, to tracking down your orders, for example, basically avoiding the need for us to have that manual data entry. The other thing that we're trying to gain out of using digital platforms and technology is have that absolute oversight at any given point in time of your spend analysis, but also of your budget, without us having to physically manipulate data or enter it into Excel sheets. The other most important thing that I talked about in the first point is approval tracking. And if you work on a large construction or infrastructure projects, when you have a delegated authority matrix that's almost 16 stories high, you've got various management levels approving orders above a certain threshold or risk or duration of value, for example, you understand where we're coming from. It's multiple layers of approval. I think the time of your day is mostly spent in chasing those approvals rather than dealing with the crux of your job. So those are some of the most important things, but also post contract awards, the most important bits are supply chain transparency, visibility of who sits in your supply chain beyond tier 1 and tier 2, having visibility of sustainability risks like human rights issues, conflict minerals, or modern slavery as well. So having the visibility and traceability of risks or even opportunities brought about in your supply chain. So that is what you're trying to automate and perhaps digitalize as well. What does digitalization actually mean? So I've thrown up the SIP's definition on the slide on the screen today, but let me go with the simpler one, which says you're basically trying to convert your business processes over to the use of a digital technology instead of your analog or offline systems such as paper or whiteboards. Now, the plan, source, and manage process, here are some of the portals or the digital tools that we use currently in construction and infrastructure. Some of these will be really, really familiar to you if you're from the same background as well. The chief goal for you is to make your life easier as a procurement professional or head of the procurement management team, plant and material sourcing. The procurement process has got a lot of moving parts, your requisitions, purchase orders, your invoices, your supply details, your budget, etc. So the aim is to try to manage all of these, or at least some of these, through some of these digital platforms. Having said that, I can't name a single platform that can manage the entire process. So I'll just take you through a couple of these because some of them have overlaps between plan, source, and manage. They do not absolutely manage the entire strategic sourcing process in procurement. So Compete For, typically we use Compete For open market adverts. So this comes before the PQQ stage, almost as part of your early contractor, early supply involvement. You post an open advert to the market. Compete For is usually used for that. Source Dog, we very, very recently introduced on High Speed 2 as well. A lot of organizations are adopting Source Dog. Source Dog can incorporate your pre-qualification questionnaires as your RFI. You can do e-tendering through it. You can also build in post-contract award, your supplier relationship management piece into it as well. The beauty with Source Dog is if as a procurement professional, and you will have multiple stakeholders feeding into your procurement process, rather than chasing that manually, you can give them the ITT link via SourceDog, and your various teams, quality, health and safety, sustainability, even your technical scope writers, construction managers can feed directly into your tender then and there. Top service again is used in the planning stage of procurement, and this forms part of the financial element of the due diligence piece, where you have insight into a supplier's turnover, for example, of the last 3 years. Are they paying their own suppliers on time? What kind of insurances they hold, so on and so forth. And of course, registered office address, trade office address, etc. So that's in your planning stage. Like I said, a couple of these have got overlaps between your plan, source, and manage. Source log is also used in the sourcing stage. Delta is purely e-tendering, but you can also build your pre-qualification into it. So plan and source, Delta is good for that. Again, for pre-qualification, you've got your common assessment standards. You've got Achilles building confidence. That's one of them. DocuSign, we started using again during lockdown, where you could not physically print 5 copies of a subcontract that you're trying to award, spiral bind and send it to your supplier. DocuSign was very, very commonly adopted, especially in construction, to securely get both parties to an agreement to fully execute the contract and have that confidentiality, and also have it returned on time as well. So that was in the source process. In the management, I usually see a lot of organizations go for internal performance management systems, so something that they have designed in-house rather than outsourcing that. The outsourced element is usually for the sustainability angle. So for example, TOMS, you've got our sustainability tool, or HACT. JD Edwards, so E1 is used for plant and material procurement, so you can type in your purchase orders in there. You can also build your supplier relationship management piece into there. Like I said, I haven't discovered, correct me if I'm wrong, but I haven't found a single tool in the market that covers all of these process and post-contract award, gives you that traceability, transparency, and visibility of what's happening in the supply chain in terms of the performance after that as well. So there was a study conducted by SIPS in 2020 with regards digitalization in procurement and the supply chain management process. So a couple of their key findings, where you think or where you find that cost effectiveness was the primary benefit. If you look at the other side of the screen, cost also tends to be the biggest inhibitor in organizations being able to invest in digital technologies or procurement platforms like e-tendering, for example. But the other benefits are also having that real-time visibility of capability, agility, and of course, transparency of the supply chain. 95% of firms who took that survey adopted at least one digital platform for procurement and supply chain practice. The very, very common ones that I found, like I said, DocuSign to ensure contracts were securely fully executed between the parties. A lot of organizations went online with their PQQ as well. So adopt the common assessment standards, so CHAS Premium, Construction Line Gold, RISQS, UVDB, or build their own in-house PQQ, for example. And of course, most organizations also moved to e-tendering, whether that was through Compete for Delta or that was SourceTalk as well. 70% of organizations in the survey said they're motivated by, performance, employee productivity, operational costs, and efficiency. But I also found that some of the other motivators were things like, because we were sat at home, especially in 2020, it was collaborating with the supply chain, supplier relationship management, supplier performance management, and things like that, especially measurement of sustainability. So you would see a lot of organizations in our sector and industry investing in the likes of the sustainability tool, TOMS, and HACT as well. Just a couple of key findings from a survey report there. I've got a little bit of a video here for you from a CPO, where he talks about why he, as a CPO, thinks about digitalization, why it's important from a chief procurement officer perspective, and then I'll break it down for you because I've noted a couple of points that I want to talk you through as well.
There are clear imperatives which mean that a CPO needs to sit up and take notice of these new changes. We can see what's happening and we need to react, not only for our own benefits, but because procurement's a lot about influencing others within the organization. So we as procurement professionals need to understand the technology and the opportunity so that we can help our business users actually apply or adapt or evolve to these new areas. So what's on the CPO's mind? Well, as far as I'm concerned, that imperative around delivering savings is not going to go away. That is something that is going to be with us and is primary to what our value proposition is. But traditional ways of doing these types of activity are not going to cut the mustard anymore. Resources available to CPOs are reducing, and there's a significant challenge for high quality, talented individuals who have this open types of mindset and who are able to be much more influential, who can get better results from the data that they've got, who can provide more insight. And actually, this is a way that the CPO needs to think about what we can do using technology to maximize the resources that you do have and that you can spend. In addition to that, if you think about the other end of the procurement spectrum, procurement leaders are expected to do more than the traditional types of procurement activity. So increasingly, our role is expanding into things like risk mitigation, outsourcing processes, and really starting to protect the business from reputational damage and supplier resilience. So all of that means that we've got to really take notice of what's going on within digital and make sure that as we look outside to this really disrupted world, that we're able to adapt and adjust as quickly as possible. And when I talk about a disruptive world, we've seen major changes. We've seen massive entrants coming in like Airbnb and Uber. There are hundreds of different examples where new technology and new ways of applying business have significantly and rapidly changed the marketplace. But there have also been massive exits. So you get people like BlackBerry and Blockbuster who used to corner the marketplace, but because they've not kept themselves up, have failed and fallen by the wayside and simply disappeared into the background. And I think, therefore, a procurement leader or a procurement director needs to think about how we apply this new technology to make sure we're current and we're still at the forefront of what we do, because otherwise we may well find ourselves redundant.
I'm just going to quickly pick up on a couple of points that he mentioned within the video. The first thing is, because of the fast-paced nature of what we do, and like I said, if you're working on a large project, especially in joint ventures, it's the quantum in terms of the supplier, in terms of the requisitions and the requests coming through to the procurement team. So everything is urgent, everything that is needed now or something that is needed yesterday. So for us to have visibility of where an order or a requisition is actually stuck in the process, because if you're like me, if you've been in the procurement background, commercial world and supply chain management, nothing ever goes right. If something goes wrong, it's always procurement's fault. And if something is being held up in the process, it's all down to procurement, and we often get blamed for that. For us, it was always the number one driver. Where is a request, a purchase order, a supply contract, or a subcontract stuck in the process? Why is it not physically executed and out the door? So for us, that was always the number one driver, especially to get it done on high speed too. You can imagine the quantum of requisitions coming through on there. Secondly, being able to influence others, especially your internal stakeholder engagement and management. Once you have a tool that gives you visibility of requisitions coming in, the amount of purchase orders generated in a day or where it's stuck, you can then have those conversations with management or your head of department to say, okay, fine, at least I've done what I needed to do for the day. It's now sat with X, Y, Z. So you're able to speak to your stakeholders to probably mitigate those barriers. Most importantly, and the gentleman brought up on the video, is risk mitigation and reputational damage. I'll give you a couple of examples here. So using top service reports in the financial due diligence of the procurement process. So really early on, you're trying to firm up your tender list. Let's say you've got 20 responses from your open advert on a works package. You now bring it down to a healthy tender list of 5 to 7 suppliers or 5 to 7 subcontractors. The first thing that we do in the process is the financial due diligence. So you either use something like Top Service, Dun & Bradstreet report. So this gives you visibility into the financial health of your supply chain. Now, Top Service is got a link to it wherein every awarded supplier or subcontractor that sits on your tender list, your procurement schedule, and on your project, you're able to generate, I think it's once a month. It also generates a report for all of your awarded suppliers and subcontracts on one screen for you to then track their turnover. It RAG rates them for you automatically. So month on month or quarter on quarter, if their turnover starts to dwindle to the negative, you then can have those open conversations with them. You start to get a feel of, okay, is my supplier going to go bust? Are they going into administration? Do I need to do some mitigation plans in place? So That was one of the tools and technologies via top service that we used to keep a check on the financial health of the supply chain as well. There's another very interesting piece of work. So dealing with a client organization who have a property services arm, they were trying to implement a system wherein the persons that were going in to do some works or services on the property could be tracked. Now think about that difficulty in that space, because if you're working on a construction or an infrastructure project, I think we take it for granted that there will be a turnstile. When you turn up for work, you swipe in some kind of card, which then tells the person on duty that yes, you are the right person that's supposed to be working on that, that job or that project today. You have the right tickets, whether it's your CSCS cards, triple STS or SMSTS, and you also have your right to work in the UK document. So you're the correct person, you've got the correct tickets, and you're not a victim of modern slavery, for example. But when you think about property services management, when you're going to someone's home to do some work or renovation work or services, a person's home or residential areas don't have turnstiles, and that's where the risk is. What do property management and property services organizations do to put in place? So we were trying to come up with a solution like RFID tags may be placed on the PPE of the person, wherein once they swipe that via an app, perhaps it told us that yes, that was the correct person that's turned up to that home. Yes, they've got the correct tickets and qualifications in place, and they've also got the right to work checks done there and there. The risks with working in other people's home and in property management services is that there could be vulnerable people, there could be women or children at home as well. And if the wrong person or not the right person turns up for the job, then that's a whole different nightmare altogether as well. So just a couple of examples when thinking about risk mitigation and what's the technology that can be used in that space. I'm going to move on to the next slide. So take this really, really slowly and just digest it. What are the things you need to consider when you're starting on your digital technology transformation for your procurement function and your supply chain management function? Again, I will reiterate the point that technology needs to support your strategy and not the other way around. So first of all, even today, procurement professionals like you and me, we still carry out a lot of those low value adding and more operational tasks rather than the strategic ones that we should be doing. But some of those operational tasks can very well be entrusted to a technology platform or to the digital world, basically. And then you'll start to see the benefits with improvements in your cost efficiency ratio. So McKinsey and Company did a report a few years ago where they said, if you map out your procurement process, plan, source, manage, right from your sourcing strategy through to contract award and actual payment of the supply invoice, sourcing through to pay, 40% of all of the activities within that process can actually be automated, which is a great thing. And that will leave your procurement team, your buying team, able to concentrate on the crux of our job, which is negotiation. In my experience, I think we would spend 90% of our time in admin tasks and chasing up all of our internal stakeholders to get things approved, to get the inputs into the PQQ and tender process. And literally at the end of the strategic sourcing or strategic procurement process, we would have a day and a half, 2 days maximum to negotiate a BAFO, a best and final offer. And that's not really the way a procurement team should work. You should have the maximum amount of time for your final negotiation at the end. And that's where you need to have some digital portals that can take away those routine and mundane tasks. What are your main disruptive technologies? So I think we use quite a lot of them already. Like I showed you the current technology that we are using in the plan, source, and manage stage. Right from source to contract, procure to pay, we are using them, but that doesn't mean we stop there. We need to continuously digitalize our process to dematerialize all of those tactical parts of the process. A couple of things, I won't talk about all of them, but one of them is robotic process automation. I know it sounds like a sci-fi movie or something, but a robotic process automation can actually automate all of your repetitive, low value adding tasks, but it also adds accuracy and verification to your process. So think about things like quantity surveyors or even the finance team continuously managing your invoices, for example, or validating purchase requests. So this is quite an important part of the process where you can include for digital technology. I'll give you an example of a project. So we did this on a project called Tideway. And we had a few complaints from suppliers coming through to say, we're not getting paid on time. The payments are delayed way beyond the 28 or 30 days. It's going to 45 or 60 days. The issue was internal because we just had 2 or 3 members within the finance team. So it was taking a really, really long time for us to verify purchase order versus delivery ticket versus what have they invoiced and what do we actually need to pay them at the end before we finally pay them. That project went with the decision of getting 2 robots on board and not the walking, talking robots like you'd see in a Hollywood movie with like a head and 2 hands or something. They literally got like 2 massive computers, like if computers were there in 1910 or something, 2 massive computer robotic machines sat on a desk. What these robotic machines did was they were very, very quickly able to match up delivery ticket to invoice to purchase order so that finally all the finance team needed to do is they had the accuracy, they had the information, is just processed payment. So by using that robotic technology, we were able to transfer a lot of those time-consuming tasks away from the finance team and to the robotic process technology that was introduced. The other thing that we did on high speed too, and we did this with suppliers, but suppliers of large volume and large longer supply duration contracts as well, is e-ticketing. So having sat at home since 2020, the one issue we noticed is that goods were getting delivered to site because construction managers, site agents, engineers were on site. But procurement and commercial teams, we were working from home, which meant that paper delivery tickets would get signed by someone, kept in a desk somewhere, and they would get lost, again, leading to the very same payment or problem of we weren't able to pay suppliers in time because tickets went missing or they landed up in another site office, and we hardly ever got them back on time to process, for example. So we asked 2 of our largest suppliers, I think for aggregates and rebar, to incorporate e-ticketing and give us access to their platform. So at any given point of time, the site agents and commercial managers had access to, we had copies of the purchase orders, but what was being delivered and what was being invoiced, rather than we've got missing paper tickets flying all over the London sites, for example. So that was something else that we put in place over there. Internet of Things basically, but this requires connection, network connectivity. So this is connecting services and equipment together to transmit data on the user and his or her environment. Think about this in terms of trying to monitor supply, demand, and of course, making forecast reports as well, and stock managing. I had this experience of using such kind of a technology in Dubai, where you would typically have a stores manager. All of your goods and your products would get delivered to a central warehousing from which all of the materials were then transported out to site. So at any given point of time, a central warehouse receives all of your material. And we used to have really manual SRV, stores receive voucher. Then from there to figure out which amount of which package needs to go to which project, and which project ran out of material and we needed to order more. So someone designed a process back in the day in-house to actually track what was coming in, how do you break that bulk, segregate it out to different projects. And when the stock started to dwindle, the system would automatically tell us project X needs more of so-and-so material, so-and-so quantum. And we could feed that back into procurement. A requisition will be placed, and again, a purchase order generated. So that was something that we did there as well. Blockchain. Now, blockchain is quite an interesting one because a lot of people tell me it costs a lot of money. It's an investment. Yes, it's an investment. Any of these technology platforms and digital solutions will be an initial investment. Having said that, someone said to me, oh, it's impossible. You just never will have that visibility and traceability of the supply chain. So let me talk you through it first. So it's a process that stores and transforms and transmits your information in a secure and transparent manner for all of the people or the parties involved in that value chain, not just your supply chain. So think about goods, products, components of products coming from or even transmitting geopolitical regions riddled with issues of conflict minerals, human rights issues, modern slavery, for example, bribery, corruption, or even fake goods. I'll give you an example here. In the food and beverage industry, if you probably are aware of Knorr, K-N-O-R-R, the brand that does like noodles and soups, for example. So they wanted to trial this to give the ultimate consumer, let's say you and me, visibility of the supply chain of soup packets or something, for example. And it was pork soup, for example. So they implemented blockchain right from the pork farm in Vietnam all the way through the supply and the value chain onto the packet of soup. So, for example, if you had to buy a packet of Knorr pork soup, for example, you could scan the barcode on the packet as a consumer and you could trace the supply chain and value chain and the processes to ensure it was responsibly sourced, ethically sourced, all the way back to the pork farm. So just an example of an organization that implemented blockchain. So it is possible for those of you who say, it's not possible at all. The transformation of the function. So if you do decide, or if you have already implemented some digital platforms within Plan, Source, Manage, or across all of the three, the one thing that happens now is a good thing. Your buying team and your procurement team has a lot more time to do the value-added tasks, but also to work towards the strategic priorities of the organization. So participate in the company strategy, but also engage in more of those stakeholder satisfying activities. And I'll give you a very, very real example here. So I think it was last Monday. So I went for a workshop with a client organization and their plant and material suppliers. It surprised me at first because I've worked within that team and I've seen the amount of routine and mundane tasks that plant and material buyers had to do. And I was wondering, but in a pleasant way, how come they had the time to sit down collaboratively with the supply chain and talk about efficiencies and sustainability, etc. So I had a chat with the lead plant and material buyer, and what he said to me, Mel, is like, we have a lot more time to think about HVO and hybrid and telematics platforms. So I'm like, what changed for you in the process? So they have automated all of their requisition process that feeds into the purchase orders being generated. It gives management absolute visibility of who the approval is pending with, for example. And by automating bits and pieces of the process, it has freed up the time of the buyers. And now they're working towards strategic things like actually having a plant desk for operated and non-operated plant in place. They're also going to start a labor desk, and they're having conversations with their PPE suppliers around recyclability, waste hierarchy, circular economy, and even PPE laundry, wherein a couple of years ago, two or 3 years ago almost, they were literally reacting to every paper requisition that landed on their desk. So once you start to invest in digital technology, your function itself is going to be transformed into thinking a bit more strategically as well. New skills, I think new technology will definitely improve the buyer skill because they will have to master the new technology platform to use it and implement it. The one thing, however, to keep in mind is that computer programs will perform your operations way faster with greater accuracy. But the one thing they won't do is that critical thinking piece. That will still sit with the buying team, but by combining their critical thinking with the power of the data that's now at their hands, thanks to these digital platforms, you are better able to manage your stakeholders. And I keep coming back to stakeholders in the procurement process, and that is because we are a services function at the end of the day. I say this in a lot of my procurement workshops. Procurement do not get a specification or a budget to procure something for a house or garden. It's for the organization and the project that you're working for. Having said that, that's why you've got multiple stakeholder input into your process. So right from the planner, the designer, construction team, even single site agents, quantity surveys, your budget holder, your budget allocator, health and safety, quality, environmental team. So you will now start to work with all of these teams more strategically as well. This is a very simple slide that I'm putting up on the screen. But again, this is not rocket science. I think it's quite safe to say once you move away from that pen and paper to a customizable dashboard, real-time alerts, I think any procurement professor and buyer would be happy in the profession. It removes your tedious, your time-consuming, your repetitive tasks. I think that your employees have to slog through on a daily basis. Like I said, 80 to 90% of my time as a plant and material buyer in a previous life was all about, before COVID, physically running around the office, begging people for approvals or getting some time in their diary to approve requisitions and purchase orders or supply contracts, whatever they were. Better decision making, because the visibility features of some of this procurement platforms and technology gives you insights into what's happening in the procurement process. And also if you're using forecasting tools, and it gives you that supply and demand kind of results as well. Improved agility. Think about if you start to make manual amendments or tweaks to anything in your process, and then you have to feed it into all of your stakeholders, versus if you start to make it in a digital platform or within a system, it updates all of your users and all of your stakeholders at the same time. Having said that, it's not always all about the benefits. You also got a couple of pitfalls here, just a few. Some of you will be familiar with or will have met some very technology happy people who like to play with like the new toy that they have just received. So this platform puts a lot of control in your hands, and there is a temptation to overmanage or over-engage as well. So being very careful with the platform and using it appropriately, but also think about your supply chains. You'll have non-digital suppliers. So just because you as an organization or a project have decided to take that technology leap, it does not mean that all of your suppliers will have been able to make that investment as well. Whatever procurement platform or digital tool that you're investing in, make sure it does not disrupt any of your supplier relationships. Having said that, if you're investing in a tool wherein you expect your supply chain to engage as well, make sure that you have given them visibility of that platform, you've given them access to it as well. And if you're training your internal staff on that new platform that your suppliers also have to use, then provide that training to your suppliers as well. Most importantly, if you're expecting your suppliers to use the platform and it's going to cost them something for using that platform, do give them visibility of that early on too. I have found approvals tend to get slowed down even if we use digital platforms, whether it was Delta or SourceDoc, because sometimes a lot of insight can actually slow things down and create a lot of bottlenecks. As human beings, our egos always still come into play. And for that, I typically went down the traditional route of let's have some human contact, pick up the phone, have that Zoom call, get up from your chair and actually ask people what it is that's stopping you from approving something and get them to press the button on the system. Too many tools, a lot of organizations forget about the strategy of what they're trying to do in the process and start engaging with all of the various tools. You will find some tools, like I said, that manage at least 2 or 3 parts of the process. So think about things like, if you're using Delta, then Delta can do your PQQ and your e-tendering as well. If you're using SourceDoc, you can build in your PQQ and your e-tendering and SRM. But the beauty with the PQQ of SourceDoc that I found is that if you're using the Common Assessment Standard, then SourceDoc links into Achilles building confidence and also drags in your PQQ from there. I think the last I heard, you can also drag in top service data into there as well. So first, plan out your procurement process, map out what it is that's wasting time for your buyers, procurement professionals, and then sit to explore in the market what are the tools and digital technology available to make your process smoother and leaner. Like I said, I promised you the session is not going to last an entire hour. So I'm ready to take questions if you have any, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. You can type your questions in the box for me, but I will also share the feedback form if you can just give us your feedback for today, because we're always looking to better our content. I'm just going to share that in the chat box. You can just go to the chat box and fill in your feedback. There are no questions, and that's all right. You probably don't have any. But if you've got any questions, I'm just going to wait for about 2 or 3 minutes, and then I will answer you any questions that you may have. Right, for any questions that you have, if you want to pop it into the Q&A box, I'm still here for a minute or two, otherwise we can end the session and you can have a really good Friday afternoon and a happy weekend. And if you can go into the chat function and just fill out the feedback form, that would be good too. I popped the feedback form in. Right, the audience has gone really, really quiet on a Friday afternoon. That's okay. I'm going to wait for exactly 60 seconds more for any questions. I don't know if it's a good sign or a bad sign that there are no questions on the webinar, but that's all right. And yes, besides a copy of the slide deck, we make the recordings of all of our webinars available through the school platform as well. So if you've got colleagues who missed a session today, you can always catch up on it later. We've got a question. I've seen firsthand how difficult adoption to new digital technology within procurement can be. How can the benefits of these changes be best promoted to drive adoption? I think one of the things that we did in the planning stage is to map out the amount of time it took at every point in the process. I was in Crossrail. Our procurement process was 26 weeks. When I moved to High Speed 2, the procurement process was 49 weeks for a key or a critical package. Believe me or not, 49 weeks and 26 weeks for strategic packages is even a lot. And that is because of multiple stakeholder engagement and that engagement being really, really manual and us having a lot of sign-offs in the process. Remember, I talked about the DAM, the DLAPS authority matrix as well. So you've got literally a hierarchy of signatories, each one not wanting to sign first. So I think it was for us to map out the number of days at each step of the procurement process it took versus if we had to automate all of that, how long it would take. And that was the kind of business case we made to the management to say this would be the time saved, thus money saved in the procurement process. And of course, we could spend more time in negotiation rather than 2 days for negotiation, 48.5 weeks, for example, just chasing things all over the place. Hopefully that answers your question. Is there more information on robotics used by Tideway? I'm sure there is. I could send you, let me just note down that query because I could send you the contact of someone who's on Tideway. I have physically left Tideway in 2017 or something. Let me just make a note of that any which ways, yeah? 1 minute. Kevin, and I will come back to you. Let me just write down your name and your query. And I could either send you the contact directly of the person that's still involved in that project or come back to you with some resource or something like that, Kevin. So hopefully that answers your project. I don't have the contact person's email address right here to hand, so that's cool. Any other questions? 12:45, I can actually give you 15 minutes back of your life, but I'll just wait for a minute or two if there are any other questions. I will still direct everyone to the feedback form. The link is in the chat box. We're always looking to better our content. It's just like a couple of multiple choice questions, if you can just answer that. Hi, Dave Emery. The virtual conference you hosted, so you've hosted a conference yourself, included a presentation on robotics by Richard Higginbottom. Dave, if you want to share the link to that presentation, if it's like got a recording online as well, that'd be really, really good. So Dave Emery is a part of our school as well. So he's one of my colleagues, Dave. Maybe as part of the resource post this workshop, Jenny, if you want to take that resource of Dave Emery and share it with all of the audience today, Dave, Dave and Jenny, that'll be really, really brilliant. So thank you for that. Right, I'm still going to hang on for a minute more in case there are any more questions. Okay, it's 12:47. I think I will officially say goodbye. But thank you for making the time on a Friday afternoon to attend our session. You'll get a copy of the slides. Jenny, if you can take the resource of Dave and send that through, and I'll find out about the robotics on Tideway, Jenny. I'll send that to you and you can send that to all the participants today. But thank you everyone for making the time on this Friday and see you again soon. Cheers. Bye.